Alice Hudson. I guess I'll just go ahead and admit up front that I didn't love the chapters on the developmental or advocacy cultures. I can see that both cultures were created in response to conflicts with the managerial culture and the collegial culture, but I didn't feel a lot of connection with either of them. Nevertheless, I do see positives in both. I can also see from the chapters that they're both still evolving, and it seems like they might have greater potential together rather than apart. I say that because some of their goals are aligned, but I guess it's not very likely because their methods for achieving those goals are so very different. So I guess I'll just point out some of the things that resonated with me from each. The developmental culture appealed to me as it was founded on the idea of making higher ed responsive to societal needs and a perceived lack of institutional respect for students. And I appreciate its efforts to be about more than just the classroom and include all of academic life. I can also see how assessment efforts by the developmental movement are well aligned with our readings about the recent focus on student learning and student outcomes. Even though we discussed this sentiment when we talked about evaluation of professors, I was struck by the quote on page 81. It's long, but it says, "Student success, however, can only occur if leaders of the institution and those aligned with the developmental culture in particular find ways to increase the amount of time and effort students put into their studies and other activities that lead to the experiences and outcomes that constitute student success, and find ways in which to allocate resources and organize learning opportunities and services to induce students to participate in and benefit from such activities." The culture's focus on non-traditional scholarship, faculty improvement, and instructional improvement and efficacy seem like the right start to hopefully induce students to participate in their education. And it made me think of UNCW and the push for the integration of applied learning into coursework, all of which made me wonder if Dr. DeVito would describe himself as part of this culture. And finally, I have a lot of respect for servant leadership, and I can see how it's appropriate for this culture, but also how the lack of more directive leadership may make it difficult for this culture to coalesce and grow. So, on to the advocacy culture, which is about fairness and equity, with an emphasis on getting it through confrontation rather than collaboration, which would be more the developmental culture style. Collaboration would be. Because of the focus on confrontation, much of this culture felt out of my comfort zone. Collective bargaining is a focus of this culture, with its focus on compensation and employment equity. Like the developmental culture, the advocacy culture supports non-traditional educational opportunities, but it is more focused on service learning and community partners. I did appreciate the way this culture challenges the tradition of male dominance in higher education. I can see the value of many of the tenets of this culture, but it seemed very faculty-centric rather than student or learning-centered. It also felt more combative than is my personal preference. So while I agree with many of the values of this culture, I guess I don't agree with their big picture or their strategy. So on to the Hermanowitz chapters. Again, I thoroughly enjoyed these. Having recently completed a doctoral program, I found myself comparing my experiences to their writings. My program was online, so I definitely missed out on some of the things you can only experience and the connections you can only make by being on campus. Nevertheless, I do believe my program taught us the beliefs, norms, values, and behaviors of those in our field. One of the first courses we took was about all the things people believe to be true about ed tech, just because they seem like they make sense, but that are absolutely not true. That course was the foundation for thinking like someone with a deep understanding of our field. Because ed tech is the field that actually includes distant learning, being a distance program really wasn't a hindrance. The faculty had a deep understanding of how to bring people together despite their distance, which was also something we learned over our years together. Plus, those in my cohort who planned to graduate and immediately look for work in higher ed were able to work as graduate assistants in the program, some in person and some online. Austin, the author of this chapter, lists the 4 components of socialization of future faculty as knowledge of discipline and culture, knowledge of skills of faculty work, knowledge and skills of faculty work, development of interpersonal skills, and development of professional attitudes and habits. I feel like my program addressed all of these issues, so I'd say they did a good job of socializing us for the role of future faculty, as well as for any role as ed tech leaders. As I read the Inviolable Normatives Pattern of Teaching and Mentoring chapter, I was thankful to have had wonderful ethical teachers and mentors, which means I've never really given much thought to any of this. I felt like the 5 norms pretty well covered possible abuses of power. When I was an undergraduate, I had a friend in a master's zoology program who claimed her professor stole her work on protozoa. I remember she was furious and she told anyone who would listen, but I don't think she had any real recourse. She graduated, she went on to med school, and that professor remained a professor, so I'm guessing there weren't any repercussions for him. Hopefully that would no longer be the case. And finally, the last chapter about scholarly learning. The opportunity to engage in scholarly learning as a full-time job screams my name. It screams it really loudly. It'll never be a reality for me, but it is definitely my dream. I love the idea of having the freedom to immerse yourself in learning and follow it wherever it takes you. I guess that's why I keep going back to school. It's not my full-time job, but I'm going to do it to the extent I can anyway. I firmly believe I would have been one of the professors mentioned in the research who viewed achieving tenure as the beginning rather than the end. And as hard as I've been on the role of tenured faculty in higher ed, I can understand Newman's point that if tenure is lost, scholarly learning might follow, which would obviously be to the detriment of all of us. Thank you for listening, and I just realized I forgot to include my references, so I'll include them in my post. I look forward to your videos.